Mini consoles were all the rage a few years back, with the latest one being the Sega Mega Drive Mini 2, released in 2022, which featured a lot of pretty games that are probably hard to come by nowadays, along with never before released titles. The Mega Drive was usually Sega's go-to when it came to compilations. However, it would be nice to see Sega pay attention to the other systems that made them well beloved, like the Sega Saturn and the Dreamcast. Out of the two systems, I would like to see a Dreamcast Mini the most, which I made a video on it last year, but the Saturn might be holding some gems that are unfortunately trapped on the older machine. So in today's video, I will be listing a bunch of video games I would love to see for an imaginary Sega Saturn Mini. In my Dreamcast video, I listed 26 video games, and here is no different. I would also not be listing any text-heavy games that were only released in Japan, so unfortunately no Sakura Wars. No, if they did add the fan-made English translation version, that would be great. Now we've gotten the rules out of the way, ladies and gentlemen, start your engines. First up, we need some of the essentials that define the console, starting with Sonic Team's Storycat Mystical-like adventure, Nights into Dreams. While this was easily accessible through the likes of Steam, Nights is a must, being one of the most popular games on the system, as well as being one of the most unique games too. Also, gotta add the Christmas version and the analog controller. Another Sonic Team title, but unlike Nights, Ben & Rangers never got a re-release, despite being referenced in many titles afterwards with its banger theme. This is one out of two games I want to see the most getting a re-release in some form, as it gets incredibly fun playing as a group of firefighters in space. Even if it turned out to be disappointing, I would still be glad that I got to experience it. Outside of Nights, Virtua Fighter is probably the most recognizable game in the Saturn's library, especially being the pioneer for 3D fighters, so I would be including it, or at least the updated version of the game, as the original port was buggy as heck. I would also add Virtua Fighter 2 on the list, being one of the best sellers on the system, and unlike its lesser and terrible Mega Drive port, the more fun 3D version hasn't had many re-releases. Sega had many other fighters under their belt, so I will be adding Virtua On, the Meta Arena fighter that was popular in Japanese arcades, which is super fun, as well as Fighters Metabits, which features the Virtua Fighter and the Fighting Vipers cast, as well as Bean and Bart from Sonic the Fighters, the Heroine from Virtual Cop, and the Daytona car. Speaking of Daytona USA, I will not be talking about it despite being a classic, as I already added it in my most wanted Dreamcast titles. However, there was another classic arcade racer, and that I think would be a neat addition, which is Sega Rally Championship, which apparently is the better port of the two arcade racer. That includes both ports of Daytona. While we had a few arcade classics, the Saturn also gave birth to new series, such as Panzer Dragoon, the latest game being a remake of the first game for all modern systems and PC. However, for this year's, I will be picking the sequel, Panzer Dragoon 2 Zwei, which seems to be more of the original, but with some improvements, as well as the RPG spin-off, Panzer Dragoon Saga, which has been hailed as one of the best games from a few people who have played it, as it now would cost you an arm and a leg. Apparently it now runs in emulation, but I would buy this in a heartbeat if it ever got a port. Come on Sega, keep my money. Anyway, besides Saga, the Saturn had a somewhat decent lineup of RPGs, especially if you are looking for more sign-in content. For this list, I listed two, the first one being Sign-In of the Holy Ark, that plays similar to Sign-In in the Darkness, being a dungeon crawler. However, for those being more of a fan of the tactical strategy side of the franchise, then Sign-In Force 3 would be an amazing addition. Sign-In Force 3 was split into 3 episodes, however only the first part was officially translated and released in the West. So if we ever do get Sign-In Force 3 onto the Mini, it would possibly only be the first part. If they do, I would love it if all 3 parts would be included. From turn-based strategy to RTS, I'm gonna include Dragon Force, which I've heard did things from Saturn fans, and unlike Thunder Force 3, it had a port on the Japanese PS2 as part of the Sega Ages series, so this should have a decent chance of appearing again. It also had a lot of staff who worked on Stars of Arcadia, so it might be peach fiction. One of the Mega Drive games that appears frequently in compilations is Beyond Oasis, or if you live in Europe, Story of 4, by Yuzo Koshira's company Agent, and it's a great Zelda-like adventure game, and I would eventually love to play the sequel, Legend of Oasis, but unfortunately it's only on the Saturn. A good majority of these games are exclusive to the system, and if you lived in the States, then you probably didn't have the chance to play this one, as this was only released in Japan and Europe. This was also the last Saturn game released in Europe, so it likely was sold in a very limited supply. While the Saturn had the first Resident Evil, Sega decided to develop their own Resident Evil game called Deep Fear, and would be a good pick for survival horror fans that may have not had the chance to play it. I enjoyed the Shinobi series and have played a good chunk of them, from the original Revenge of the Shinobi to the PlayStation 2 game. The only ones I haven't played are Nightshade, the sequel to the PlayStation 2 Shinobi game, and Shinobi X, or Legions if you live in the States. They'll probably cost a pretty penny. Like Sonic CDs, Shinobi X includes 2 different soundtracks, except the Europeans were the odd one out instead of the US this time. It would be cool to get both versions of the soundtrack if we got this in the Mini. It also features live action cutscenes and digitized characters, since this was the era where live action cutscenes were popular during the mid-90s. Along with Shinobi X, the Saturn had a good selection of 2D platformers with different visual styles, with 2 of them mimicking the Donkey Kong Country yet being Clockwork Knight and its sequel Clockwork Knight 2, and as someone who's enjoyed the genre, especially DKC, I would love to play these games. There is another 2D platformer on the CS that focuses and expands on what traditional sprites can do on the Saturn, with sprite staying and smoother animations called Astal. As a fan of the genre, I would love to play it. Although Capcom's games were also on the PlayStation, the company gave some love to Sega systems too, and I will be adding 2 here, the first being a Mega Man title. While Mega Man X4 is my favourite game in the series that's on the Saturn, it's practically the same experience as the PlayStation version, which has been ported to the X-Legacy collection, unlike Mega Man 8, which has exclusive content with the hidden boss fights and altered versions of the music tracks. That would be a great experience for Mega Man fans. To fill in the 2D fighter quota, I added a Capcom fighter. If Sega and Capcom had the choice, they would most likely pick a Street Fighter title over this one, since the next game I picked is based on a popular multimedia IP, being X-Men, Children of the Atom. But Disney, the owners of Marvel's characters, has allowed Sega to add the Castle and World Evolution games in the Sega Mega Drive Mini, so it's possible to add X-Men 2. Children of the Atom did appear on the PlayStation 1, but Capcom fighters played better on Sega. Sega does what PlayStation don't. Speaking of licensed games, I'm also adding Die Hard Arcade, UC based, like heavy UC based on the first Die Hard film, which is meant to be a goofy fun 3D beat 'em up. But Tanuki, what if Sega called the Die Hard license? Bam! Just give it the Japanese name Dynamite Getter that drops any names from the movie. From a polygon beat 'em up to a sprite-based beat 'em up, the next game is Guardian Heroes, which shows up what sprite-based games can do on the hardware and with how many characters can appear on screen. This game has a diverse cast of characters, advanced range of moves, and loads of replayable content from what I can tell. I get the feeling that a Golden Axe game would have looked like this on the console. Guardian Heroes was released for Xbox Live and is backwards compatible with the Xbox Series X, but will be an excellent pick for a Mini. This would be the only Saturn game developed by Treasure released in the West. However, I got one more Treasure game on this list. When I hear the most popular shmups, a few come to mind, which are the Toho series and Treasure's Ikaruga and Radiant Silvergun, the latter being on this list. Radiant Silvergun was originally only released in Japan, but has been ported to many consoles worldwide. Out of any games on this list, Radiant Silvergun might be the easiest to add for the system. To get more shmup apps in, another good addition would be Thunderbolts 5. A couple of games in the series got ported to the Switch and the Mega Drive Mini, and so far the fifth game has not been re-released since the 90s. The last two games are Sonic titles. The first one, Sonic 3D Cities of Iron, has been in many compilations throughout the generations. However, it's always been the Mega Drive version, while the Saturn version has remained there. The Saturn version included a new soundtrack, as well as a 3D version of the Sonic 2 special stage, which is so cool, and I would like to experience it. And now you may think the last game is going to be either Sonic R or Sonic Jam, since those were the only other Sonic games for the console. And while yes, that's true, I'm not including either. Instead, I will be adding the cancelled Sonic Extreme, or at least a demo of Sonic Extreme. I'm not sure if anyone has an original playable demo of the game, or if there was a playable demo to begin with, but it would be a real treat for Sonic fans, and would be a big selling point for any collector. There are a couple of games I would like to be added on this list, like the Virtual Cop and Saga Wars games, but those have issues requiring a lifetime peripheral to have a fun time, or only released in Japan. If I had unlimited freedom, I would have added a lot more. Sega has usually been good keeping their library of games alive, however a lot of their Saturn library haven't been so lucky. Releasing a mini would bring these old relics another chance at life. These are games I would love to see, but what would you love in a Saturn Mini? Or what Saturn exclusives would you love to get ported? Let me know in the comments below. I hope you have a wonderful day.